Today, I want to talk about people pleasing because for a very long time, I thought people pleasing was one of my positive qualities. I thought it meant I was kind. I thought it meant I was thoughtful. I thought it meant I cared about other people. And while some of that was true, what I've come to realize is that a lot of my people pleasing wasn't actually kindness at all. It was fear of disappointing people, fear of conflict, fear of being misunderstood, fear of someone being upset with me, fear that if I was fully honest about what I wanted, needed, thought, or felt, I might lose the relationship. And I think a lot of us do this without even realizing. We say yes when we want to say no. We explain ourselves far more than we need to. We prioritize someone else's comfort over our own. We avoid those difficult conversations. We twist and contort ourselves into shapes that feel more acceptable to other people, and then we call it being nice. One of the biggest realizations I've had over the last few years is that people pleasing is what happens when someone else's discomfort feels more important than your own. Every time we avoid disappointing somebody else, we're often disappointing ourselves instead. We abandon ourselves quietly in small moments, and then we wonder why we feel disconnected, exhausted, or resentful later on. What makes people pleasing so difficult to spot is that it often does look like kindness from the outside. People might describe you as caring, generous, thoughtful, or selfless. And whilst those things can absolutely be true, underneath there can also be a constant feeling of pressure, a pressure to get it right, a pressure to keep everyone happy, a pressure to make sure nobody is upset with you. That's not freedom. That's a full-time job. For me, people pleasing has shown up in all sorts of ways throughout my life. Sometimes it looked like saying yes when I didn't want to. Sometimes it looked like over-explaining a decision. Sometimes it looked like worrying excessively, ruminating, going round and round and round about how something would be received. I'm not going to lie, sometimes this still happens. Sometimes it looked like staying quiet when I really wanted to speak. And interestingly, one thing I've learned about myself is that actually it's much easier for me to leave a situation than it is to communicate a need within it. That has been a huge lesson for me because communicating a preference, a boundary, or a need means risking someone else's disappointment. And that's often the thing people pleasers are trying to avoid. We convince ourselves that if we can just say it perfectly, explain it perfectly, soften it perfectly, then maybe everyone will be okay. But life doesn't work like that. Sometimes people are disappointed, even when we've done absolutely nothing wrong. The truth is, most people pleasers aren't trying to manipulate anyone. They're just trying to stay safe. At some point, usually without realizing it, we learned that keeping everybody happy was safer than being fully ourselves. Maybe it helped us avoid criticism. Maybe it helped us feel loved. Maybe it helped us feel accepted. Whatever the reason, it became a strategy. There was a guy that I was seeing after my divorce. I was vulnerable, a bit scared. This was all new. And if I'm honest, that made me ripe for some proper people-pleasing behaviour. We were on a night out and I abandoned myself in spectacular fashion. I won't go into all the details because they're not really important. But what I remember most isn't what happened. It's how I felt afterwards. I remember waking up the next day feeling completely disconnected from myself. Not because I'd done something terrible, not because anyone had wronged me, but because somewhere along the way I'd stopped listening to myself. I'd ignored what I wanted. I'd ignored what felt right in my body. I'd ignored what my body was telling me in that moment. I'd become so focused on being liked, accepted, and wanted by this guy that I'd completely overridden my own inner voice. And that hit me hard. much harder than the actual situation itself. Looking back now, I can see that moment for what it really was. It wasn't about dating, it wasn't about him. It was about my relationship with myself. It showed me how easily I could abandon myself when I was scared. It showed me how quickly I could hand my sense of self-worth over to someone else. And strangely enough, it ended up being one of the catalysts for some really positive changes. It prompted me to stop drinking alcohol for a while, to spend more time with myself, and start paying much closer attention to the moments where I was saying yes when I meant no. So whilst I definitely wouldn't have chosen the lesson at the time, there were silver linings, because the moments we're least proud of end up teaching us the most, for sure. The problem is that strategy works brilliantly when you're young. It works great, the people pleasing, when you're little, but it becomes exhausting when you're an adult, because eventually you lose sight of what you really want. You become so focused on trying to manage everyone else's emotions, which we can never do anyway. And then the resentment starts creeping in. Exhaustion starts creeping in, frustration starts creeping in, because the person carrying all of that weight is you. And one thing I've noticed in my healing journey is that people pleasing often creates the type of relationships where nobody actually really gets to know the real you. They get to know the version of you that adapts, the version of you that keeps peace, the version that doesn't rock the boat. And whilst that can feel safer in the short term, it can also feel incredibly lonely, because deep down you know you're not being fully seen. I've experienced this in friendships, in relationships, in work and family dynamics. And what I've discovered is that people are allowed to be disappointed. That sounds so simple, but it changed so much for me. People are allowed to wish I'd made a different decision. People are allowed to prefer a different outcome. People are allowed to disagree with me. And it doesn't mean that I've done something wrong. And I think that's where the healing has really been for me. Not learning how to stop caring, because I still care deeply. I'm human. But learning that I can survive someone else's disappointment. Learning that I can tell the truth and remain safe. Learning that I can communicate a boundary without abandoning myself. And learning that I don't need to earn love by constantly making life comfortable for everyone else. And here's the surprising part. The more I've practiced this, the more peaceful my life has become. Not because everyone suddenly agrees with me, and not because nobody ever gets upset. People do. When you start speaking your truth and people are used to you adapting, it does upset some people. But it's become more peaceful because I'm no longer carrying responsibility for the feelings that don't belong to me. I'm learning where I end and somebody else begins. Because ultimately, relationships that require you to betray yourself in order to keep them aren't really relationships at all. They're performances. And performances are exhausting. The irony is that when we stop people pleasing, we're often afraid that everyone will leave. But what I found is that the relationships that matter, they tend to become healthier. They're built on something real, not on constantly managing perceptions, not on keeping each other happy, not on pretending, just honesty. And I'm not going to lie, honesty isn't always comfortable, but it is freeing. So if you're listening to this and you're recovering from people pleasing too, I want you to leave with this. Someone being disappointed does not mean you've done something wrong. Someone disagreeing with you does not mean you've done something wrong. Someone misunderstanding you doesn't mean that you've done something wrong. And someone leaving doesn't mean you've done something wrong. One of the biggest lessons I've learned over the past few years is that other people's feelings belong to them, and my feelings belong to me. My job isn't to manage everyone else's emotions. My job is to be honest, to be kind, and to stay connected to myself. Because the truth is, every time we abandon ourselves to keep someone else comfortable, we strengthen the belief that who we really are isn't enough. And every time we tell the truth, communicate a boundary, express a preference, or honour what feels right in our bodies for us, we strengthen that trust in ourselves. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for everyone around you is to tell the truth. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.